If you need a vehicle with lots of room inside but don't have any interest in a minivan or a truck-based SUV like the Chevy Tahoe, there are a few good options out there to choose from, and one of them is right here, the Chevrolet Traverse. Now, there is a new version on its way next year that looks pretty cool. Whether or not it's worth the wait, well, that is up to you, but I'm here to tell you it's definitely not necessary. For more expert car reviews, don't forget to share our channel and subscribe so you can catch some of this and maybe even a little of that. Look, I am not here to dissuade anyone from waiting for that 2024 Traverse, which is apparently going to be available with the Z71 off-road package for the first time, and I think that's pretty cool. Chevy's also promising more, SUV-like proportions. I take to mean something more chiseled. This one, it's a little oversized, kind of long and lean, wagon-ish. Most SUVs like this these days, they're pretty boxy. If you take a look at the Hyundai Palisade, the Kia Telluride, Nissan Pathfinder, all of those things have very defined, chunky lines. So if that's what you want, wait for the next one. But if you're just looking for outright space, there is absolutely nothing wrong with this thing. It's also using its proportions very well. Believe it or not, it's just about the identical length to the Pathfinder and the Palisade overall, but the wheelbase is substantially longer. It's something like 6.5 inches longer, and that means all kinds of extra room inside. And just take a look in here. Now, I'm not just talking about what's on the spec sheet either, because every single dimension, you can see it and feel it, just how much bigger it is in here. Yes, you do have to divide the legroom between the second and third rows, but there's just more of it. I can fit comfortably back there, no problem. That to me is the big sell here. The other big one is just how easy it is to get in and out of this thing. The doors are massive. The openings are huge. They open nice and wide. Also, they're low. That to me is one of those underrated features that I think some of you out there are going to appreciate more in an SUV like this versus these kind of rugged ones that have taken over the segment. This thing is like getting into a car, and that means kids or people with mobility challenges are going to appreciate just how easy it is to climb in and out of this thing. It's a lot like a minivan, which I still think so many of you should keep on your shopping lists. But if you are completely against them, well, that's on you, but you should definitely take a look at this Traverse. There's also a ton of cargo room in here. But before we get to that, I do have to level one complaint. If you take a look at the captain's chairs in the second row of this one, well, they're pretty cool. It also means the kids are going to be a little bit further apart. They can keep their stuff in between them, or keep them from fighting, I guess. But the big problem is, if you want to climb into the third row of this thing, the only way to do it is to either squeeze between those captain's chairs or fold either one of them in half and climb over. And that to me is just no good. Just about every SUV I can think of out there has a tilt function. The second row seats tilt forward. You can just kind of crawl back there. No biggie. This one, very awkward. That is a problem. Whoa. Stop it right there. Now, what I'm saying, it's not entirely wrong, although there is a bizarre caveat. Now, on the driver's side, there is no way to tilt that captain's chair forward, but on the passenger side, there's this little handle here. Makes it pretty easy to climb into the third row. I don't get why it's only on one side of the vehicle, but I figured you guys should probably know. Anyways, let's get back to the action. What's not a problem is how much cargo room there is behind that third row. There's like 650 liters. It is unbelievable. That's about 140 more than something like the Palisade or the Pathfinder. And then if you fold the third row, there's like 340 more liters of space. It is just unbelievable how well packaged this thing is. I really think it's going to make family life a breeze, especially if you've got more than a couple kids or you're often shuttling around the in-laws as well as your kids. You are going to love how much room there is in here. Okay, so that's sort of the nuts and bolts of this thing, what I think makes it good. I do think you're going to notice that it looks and feels pretty outdated in here. A lot has changed over the last 5 years since this second gen version came out. And a big way you can tell is this touchscreen. It is an 8-inch display, but it looks very small. That's both because of the overall size of this thing and just because of how massive touchscreens have gotten in the last few years. Now, the new Traverse is going to have a screen that's more than twice the size of this thing. It's 17.7 inches, absolutely massive. That is standard across the lineup. This one, it's tiny, but I do like that it's super low on the dash. It is not distracting at all. And I also love this software. The infotainment system is going to be very familiar, even if you have never used GM's infotainment before, because it works a lot like a smartphone or a tablet. You've got these icons. I'll say it's also super responsive to inputs. The graphics are bright and crisp. This thing also has Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Both of those connections are wireless, so you can hook your actual phone up and get access to your music, your messages, your maps, all of that good stuff. I really like it. I also like that there are still a ton of physical controls in here. This whole bank of controls for climate, audio, all kinds of stuff. There's a proper gear selector on the console, little drive mode dial. We'll get to that in a second. There's also a ton of buttons on the steering wheel. So it feels very approachable, simple. You don't need to crack the owner's manual. It's like I say, you always should. But if you're first driving off the dealer lot, or I don't know, your kid takes it out for the first time, you don't want them to get in and feel all confused. You want them to be able to get in and go, and that is exactly what you can do here. Now, something else I really like about the Traverse, it has a built-in Wi-Fi hotspot that is standard across the lineup. Yes, it is going to need a data plan, but it also means the kids won't have to download everything onto their tablets before that next road trip. They can just stream stuff, and that means giving you a little peace and quiet out on the open road. But that's where we come to yet another one of my concerns here. Not all that comfortable. This driver's seat, it's a little firm and flat, not much contouring, and I find after only about an hour, some cramping and discomfort sets in. So that's something to keep in mind if you're planning to use this as sort of a long distance cruiser. I think the same is true about the back seats as well. Something else I don't like, the plastics up here, down on the doors, they look like the stuff you'd find in a pre-production model. Not all that great, so I hope that gets addressed with the 2024 Traverse. But something I do like, active noise canceling, that's also standard across the lineup, and it makes this thing pretty quiet, not a ton of road or wind noise to contend with. And this is also super smooth. Now, we are about to go over some train tracks, and I will tell you right now, this is one of the better managed SUVs this size I have ever driven. It handles itself super well, and it just uses steel springs and conventional dampers. Nothing fancy about this, so that I really like. I also like the handling. The steering, it is perfectly weighted for an SUV this size. Hallelujah, an automaker got it right. Too many of them these days are way too light. It's deceptive. It doesn't give you an accurate sense of the size and the weight of these vehicles. This one is spot on. And more mechanical good stuff, this engine. It's a 3.6 liter V6. It doesn't make big numbers, but it doesn't need to. It also feels like there's more torque than the 266 pound-feet that it actually makes. A nice and gradual buildup. And this transmission is awesome too. I think it's a 9-speed automatic. And as soon as you get your foot into it, it drops a gear, spikes the revs. It knows that you're about to pass or merge on the highway. And that is exactly what you want. No hunting for gears. Now, something else that's great on the highway, pretty efficient overall, better than the official numbers. I was down in the low 9s earlier this week, but around town, this thing is an absolute pig. I was averaging 14.5 liters per 100 kilometers before I went on my evaluation drive that has a big highway loop, a bunch of secondary roads. That helped, so I'm down around 10 liters per 100 kilometers combined so far. That's better than the 11.8 liters per 100 that it's officially rated for. Still not super great. This is one of the most inefficient SUVs this size. that you will find, but again, not out on the highway. Something else that's kind of cool, also a little bit weird, you can disengage the all-wheel drive system using this little dial down here on the console. And here's the problem. As much as I think it's pretty cool that you can do that, most SUVs like this do that automatically these days. They just disengage the rear wheels because most of them are front biased when you're cruising, and then as soon as they detect slippage, well, they will activate the rear wheels, send torque that way to help get you out of whatever situation you are in. This one, well, if you turn the all-wheel drive system off and run it in front-wheel drive, not only does it mean it's not that much more efficient, but it also means you have to actively turn it back on. Otherwise, you are not going to have that extra traction when you need it. That is something I find at least a little bit peculiar because, again, most of these systems are fully automatic. The fact that this one can be manually overridden, well, I guess it has its pros and cons. One other thing I do want to talk about before we get to pricing, the advanced safety features. Now, there's a pretty decent suite, not complete down lower in the lineup, but even once you get to this RS trim, you get just about everything that you could ask for. Lane keep assist, adaptive cruise control, forward collision warning, automatic emergency braking, blind spot monitoring. It is all here. I will say though, the forward collision warning system is one of the most sensitive I have ever encountered. It is not city friendly whatsoever. Street parked cars make this thing beep and flash unlike any vehicle I have ever driven in my life. It's very odd. It actually scared me. The day I picked it up, I was cruising around town and it just started flashing and beeping and I didn't know what was going on, and I carried on my way and I kept going, and there was another street parked car and I was wide to go around it, but it started doing it again, and that's when it dawned on me. It's cars on the side of the road. So that's something that's a little odd, especially because you don't want to turn that off. So I don't like how sensitive that is, but otherwise it's a good suite, not super crazy, no hands-free highway driving, but it will do the job. So pricing, lower in the lineup, this thing is very reasonable. A couple trims that are well below 50 grand, and that is great to see these days. This RS trim I'm testing, $50,500 or so before tax. It's above this thing, the Premier and the High Country. The Premier is about 60 grand, the High Country is 65. That is a lot of money. If I'm looking at spending that much on one of these, I personally am probably going to wait for that 2024 Traverse, but even this RS seems not too bad considering everything you got. Most of all, the room this thing has, as well as the outstanding on-road driving. I love how simple, straightforward, and smooth this thing is. Don't overlook this outgoing version of the Traverse. To recap, I like how spacious the Chevy Traverse is, the low and wide door openings it has, and how smooth it is on the open road. I don't like how thirsty it is around town, that it looks and feels a bit dated inside, and that it's a little expensive at the top of the lineup. In the end, there's nothing wrong with waiting for the new Traverse, which should be here sometime early next year, but just keep in mind the growing pains that can come with new vehicles. That thing's going to have an all-new powertrain plus that infotainment system, both of which could lead to some headaches, at least in the early days. Now this thing, it's not all that flashy, but if it's space you need, you can't do much better. Yes, I wish the seats were just a little more comfortable, but otherwise this thing's got long-distance family hauler written all over it.